We're so glad that you could be with us this month. So this is the third in our communication series. At the end of our presentation today, I'll tell you a little bit about what our fourth communication briefing will be next month. But for now, for today, we are going to hear from a really fabulous group that I'm so excited to have with us. Galvanize Action is one of a small but growing number of groups that are really focused on rural voters and understanding what they want and how to communicate effectively with them. So what we're going to have a presentation from Ariel Volk with Galvanize, and then in the Q&A, she will be joined by her colleague, Kristin Wheeler. So that's the program for today. And Ariel, why don't you go ahead and get started? Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Erica, for that introduction. And thank you, Rural Urban Bridge Initiative, for having us. It's really such a pleasure to be here with you all today. I'm going to share with you what we've learned about rural white women over the past 6 years and the messages that are effective at moving them on key issues, specifically the economy, abortion, and culture wars. So as extreme and divided as things seem right now, the reality is there is a huge opportunity with moderate women, if only we know how to connect with them. So through our years of research, we have developed expertise with moderate women in rural, small town, and suburban America. Through our unique combination of data science, neuroscience, and behavioral psychology, we've identified 44 million moderate white women around the country who want an America that works better for everybody, but who aren't particularly entrenched ideologically or tied to either political party. And 16.5 million, or 38% of these 44 million moderate white women, are rural. We've proven that when we connect with them on their values and in the ways that make them feel seen and heard and cared about, we can interrupt and diffuse the ugly grievance-based narratives that are being used to divide us today. And we can successfully persuade them, significant numbers of them, to use their political power to stand up to protect democracy and to advance progress. So this is really our secret sauce, is to deeply understand their values and what drives their vote, to meet them at their values with ads and messages that are rooted in neuroscience, and to deliver the right message to the right woman because we do know them so well. As we've done the work to understand and connect with these women, we've developed a particular expertise with the moderate white ladies. And the reason for that is pretty simple. Before Galvanize was created, there was no national organization that was dedicated to understanding and connecting with and moving this constituency. And we have amazing allies who are dedicated to mobilizing and turning out the base and young progressive voters and voters of color. But there was a gaping hole when it came to moderate white women. And that was a really big missed opportunity because white women are actually the largest voting bloc in the country at 38%. And they represent the largest share of movable voters nationwide. They make up an even bigger share, 44%, in key states where we root our work, and that is Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. And these are battleground states where a few thousand votes can swing an election. So white women, they are key to advancing and sustaining a multiracial coalition for progress, but they are just one slice of the pie, and we really do see ourselves and our work as a complement to our progressive allies in the space. So how do we know which women we can move? We have a custom model. So we worked with our partners at Grow Progress. We conducted a national survey of 5,000 white women, and this allowed us to gather insights into their values and their beliefs, their opinions and attitudes. And we specifically designed the survey to explore the drivers of many of the key traits associated with white women's political behavior. So internalized sexism, self-esteem, racial resentment, and the predisposition to conspiratorial thinking. And then the results from the survey were used to create clusters or profiles of women who hold similar traits. And we generated 5 profiles from our analysis, and those are the 5 you can see at the top of the slide. And then when you remove the folks at both extremes, so the Trump conservatives and the liberal progressives, you're left with those 3 segments in the middle, and those are our persuadable voters. So with this model, we know who we can reach and what is different about them so that we can really tailor our approach and our communication to each group based on what uniquely drives and motivates them. What's really exciting is that we're actually refreshing this model and we are fielding our new survey this week. So we're going to have even more insights to share about our audience in the next month. We also know what holds these women back. So over the last 6 years, we've engaged deeply with these women, listened to them, and here's what they're telling us. They feel alone, like nobody around them shares their views. They feel like they don't know enough to talk about politics, or they can't confidently express their views. They feel like if they do talk about politics, it will lead to conflict, and they feel like they don't even matter. We also understand what disinformation these folks are being targeted with. So we know we're not the only ones who are trying to reach these voters at their values. The right has been using grievance-based politics rooted in fear and threats to trigger racial resentment and outgroup derogation. Movable white women are seeing these narratives, and the more they see them, the more they believe them. So we take all of the deep knowledge and understanding of our audience, and we apply a multi-pronged approach to communicate with them. First, through our nonpartisan community program, Galvanize Together, which offers engaging cultural content that drives positive behavior change. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. And then through our compelling digital broadcast ads. Our national digital program, Galvanize Together, offers women content they care about in a format that is both entertaining and relatable for them. And we do this via focus groups, SMS, and our Dear Grace advice column. Dear Grace is designed for our target audience with their values, concerns, motivations, and their barriers all in mind. It makes women feel seen, heard, and most importantly, not alone. Women, they're tuning in and they're actually thinking about what they think on these issues. And that is a crucial step to building their knowledge and their confidence and their political self-efficacy. So what Grace does is offer solid advice with a pro-social lens, all of which is completely informed by our research and our message testing, so that if they're worried about relationships or money or jobs or childcare, Grace reminds them they are not alone, provides them with some constructive solutions, and then reminds them to advocate for what they need. We launched this program last July, and we already have over 125,000 subscribers, and we are on track to have 250,000 by November. So we're really excited about this program and its growth. What we know is that the rural moderate women in our audience are not single issue voters, so effective engagement really needs to address the range of issues they care about most. And for the purpose of this presentation, I'll do a deep dive on the inroads we found on economy, abortion, and culture wars in particular. So in every previous election in modern history, this audience has been driven by their economic anxiety, and this year is no different. When we ask women, what is the #1 issue for them when they're thinking about voting, economy is always the top issue for the greatest number of women. So here you can see 36% of white women picked economy as their #1 issue. And this is consistently the case with our voters. They are worried about making ends meet. They want to know that the candidate they vote for cares about their family and is going to deliver for them. I also want to note that 11% of white women say abortion is their #1 issue. And that percentage, it has crept up a bit since we asked last quarter, which was 9%. And it's quite a bit higher than in the days before Dobbs. So if looking at this, if we are able to persuade voters that a candidate cares about them and has their families back when it comes to making ends meet and the economy, the next question many of them are going to ask is, what is the candidate's stance on abortion? So this doesn't just tell us what might motivate women to vote one way or another, but it shows us what is important to our audience. And these are the things that we are seeing matter most to them. I'll now talk a little bit about some of the messaging frames that are effective on the economy. Economic conditions are just terrible for people, and the answer is not to just pull up your bootstraps. We really want to acknowledge that things are hard and then provide them with real solutions and ways that they can overcome it. So when talking about the economy, it's important to understand that sometimes it's also not just that they are hurting, but they actually feel resentful that others are getting ahead while they are struggling. And that grievance is a really powerful weapon for the right, and it can be very dangerous if we don't work to combat it. So in our experience, folks need to feel seen, and they need to believe that we understand their struggle, we care about them, and we have their back. And when we genuinely do that, and we talk to folks in the language that resonates with them and their values and their worldview, more folks will choose to join us. So we do this in 3 different ways. First, using personal stories. So giving examples of small and real ways the government is supporting and improving the economy. And this is a great way to show the government has your back in tangible ways, such as Social Security, SNAP benefits, or Medicaid. Second is to right-size the role of the government. So a lot of folks on this call are probably doing this already, but we really want to make sure our voters and our audience, they are the heroes of the story, and that the government is only playing a supporting role. And this helps to get over the barrier of deservingness and fairness, the idea of a handout versus a hand up, and it shows that everyone is working their butts off. And third, focus on the benefits to kids. So messages that highlight children as deserving, it helps to sidestep concerns about deservingness of parents. And then the biggest caution when messaging on the economy is not to be overly optimistic about economic conditions, which can conflict with people's lived experiences right now. So this is an example of an economy message that is really effective, and I'll read this and then break down kind of based on the values that it speaks to. So things are tough right now. My husband and I are working full-time jobs and still struggling to make ends meet. I can't imagine what we would do without our community to support us. We're lucky that my mom lives nearby and helps with the kids before we're home from work. It just shouldn't be this hard though. And I know I'm not the only one that feels this way. I'm in a text group with all of my girlfriends in the neighborhood, and we're all feeling it. I really wish we had some support systems we could count on, like affordable childcare, so my mom can enjoy her golden years and not continue to play caregiver. So by acknowledging that things are tough right now, that is really realistic for people, saying they are working full-time, this is illustrating dignity and respect for working and taps into that merit value. Struggling to make ends meet is also very realistic, and it's not being Pollyanna about the lived experiences of many people. And then mentioning the role of the community and the mom and the children is particularly salient. That addresses their in-group care value and a desire to protect the people they're closest to and others who are very similar to them. So I'm going to show you an ad. This was particularly effective at moving rural white women. We asked whether they'd be willing to increase taxes, even if they didn't personally benefit. And the money went toward federally funded childcare, and rural women agreed and moved 21 points.
Listen, I get it. Being a parent is hard, and being a single parent is harder. I was a single mom, and you have to do everything yourself. The mad rush to get out the door in the morning, get to work on time, soccer, dance, homework, dinner, and then do it all over again the next day. That's why I dedicated my career to supporting families so that they have free childcare, so that they can support their own kids. And if the government and business work together, we would all be better off. Everybody deserves this kind of support.
So this ad is successful because it taps into merit and in-group care. Next, we'll talk a little bit about how to move rural white women on abortion. As I noted previously, abortion is not far behind economy in terms of the most pressing issues for moderate white women. However, it is unlikely to be the silver bullet this year for our audience in the way that it is for a lot of other progressive organizations. In fact, 47% of rural white women consider a candidate's position on abortion to be one of just many important factors. And this tells us that our messaging must be focused on abortion and the economy. Our audience is especially susceptible when the status quo changes, and a perfect example is when Roe fell in the summer of 2022. And since then, we've found effective inroads to repeatedly move them toward progress on reproductive freedom. This year, we're focused on meeting them where they are as this issue continues to evolve. We're seeing more court cases and attention-grabbing headlines making the news around medication abortion and IVF. So we see an especially poignant opportunity to engage and educate our audience through digital programming, like this example from our nonpartisan community Galvanize Together. So following the Alabama Supreme Court ruling just a few weeks ago, which declared personhood for embryos, we ran this hot topic, which raised the issue with subscribers and asked them to share their insight. We also shared an updated Dear Grace column from December of 2023, which touched on the ways that potential parents using IVF might be impacted by the Dobbs decision. And our hot topic collected 765 responses within 24 hours of being shared. And we found that 50% of them were unaware or hadn't heard about the case at all. And this was particularly true among our youngest segment of women, so those under the age of 35, who were the least informed and most uncertain about the Alabama ruling. So this offered powerful, timely insight into how they view the issue and what opportunities we might have to engage and educate them further. There is a large opportunity to frame the narrative around IVF and mifepristone as the stories continue to shift between now and November. And we are finding that moderate white women, especially those in rural and small towns, have the most room to move, which presents a unique opportunity to connect their values with their voting behavior. So some messaging frames that have been particularly effective for discussing abortion with rural white women includes highlighting women as caregivers. Our women strongly identify as caregivers, so one way to get around exceptions is to hone in on women caring for other women who need an abortion and to message around that compassion value. White women, they're more likely to say, I wouldn't get an abortion, but I would be willing to take a friend to get one. And then similarly to the economy messaging, you want to right-size the role of the government by having the government play a supporting role in giving us our freedom and our choice, and then also that they are not interfering in our ability to make choices. And then third is to speak to conservative held values such as privacy, merit, and freedom. And this does differ from many of our progressive allies, but it is effective for our audience. So for example, saying women versus people can get pregnant works better for our audience, and this can be a helpful inroad. And then a cautionary tale when messaging on abortion. White women are really susceptible to a 15-week ban, so we really want to avoid leaning into any exceptions territory. We also want to be careful not to activate the pain matrix, which turns our audience off. So being very cautious about not getting too weedsy into the medical language in particular. So this is an example of a recent relevant message that calls out the driving values that we found to move this audience not only further, but really hold them there, especially understanding that our audience is more likely to say, I would never get an abortion, but. So this message provides an opportunity to see them and hear them where they are, pull on their strengths of low judgment and high compassion for their in-group. So I'll read it. Honestly, this whole situation feels like a nightmare. My sister struggled for years to start a family, and IVF was her beacon of hope. It's so wrong that states like Alabama are debating bans that take away that option. We're all different with different dreams and needs. The government should be making it easier for us, not harder. Everyone deserves the chance to make their own choices about their bodies and futures. So as you can see, this message is a clear example of those values of compassion, low judgment, and in-group care being brought to life. And we actually will be turning this message into an ad. So now I'll play another ad, follow the rules. This moved rural women 13 points.
My parents taught me to be kind and follow rules, and I'm passing that on to my kid. But sometimes rules are unfair, like with abortion policies. In many states, if you have an abortion, or even help your friend get one, you get punished. I worry about the future. I trust our laws for safety, but they should show more empathy, especially for women in tough situations. Rules matter, but they must be guided by fairness and compassion.
So for this ad, we intentionally leaned into more traditionally conservative values by tapping into merit and authority. And this is also an example of a strong contrast ad. So our messenger, Kathy, she leads us through what the other side is doing while still grounding us in our values and what we stand for, all while building a group identity to be with and for rather than against. So we know we need to continue to invest in engaging this audience on the driving behavior issues such as the economy and abortion. We know it's what's keeping them up at night, what's top of mind, especially when their ballot is in hand. However, they are not a stagnant audience that we are speaking to in a vacuum. We need to first understand who else is speaking to them, which narratives are cutting through, and then which narratives are they believing. In culture wars, regardless of the issue they are disguised as, shows up the same for this audience, and the same messaging frames can be adapted and applied across those issues, such as gender equity, crime, and immigration. So grievance-based narratives are all designed to stir up feelings of fairness and deservingness, and they play into the susceptibility around social insignificance. These women are especially vulnerable because of their over-indexed levels of racial resentment and internalized sexism. The immigration narratives are consistently reaching this audience, and we can set our clocks to when they will be dropped to cause a fight, flight, freeze moment for this audience in this cycle. And our brains are wired since day one, oftentimes referred to as tribalism, if we feel our in-group is under threat. So we will change our behavior to fight for them. This is also what is occurring in crime and parents' rights narratives right now. And the good news is that you can apply the same messaging frameworks to move them and hold them toward progress. You just need to first name the anxiety, even if it's perceived, center their in-group in your call to action. So really hold that line of progress, meet the audience where they are, and then move them to the goalpost. Do no harm, but do drop the liberal stripes. Some tips for messaging on culture wars. First, validate the discomfort without tipping into fear. So normalize the anxiety while also dispelling it. For example, when talking about gender equity and pronouns, this may look like utilizing relatable parents as messengers who emphasize that you don't have to be perfect or get it right all the time in order to treat people with respect. You also want to center the desire for people to be seen as good. So appeal to people's desire to be seen as good people over their desire to become entrenched on the fringes. Give them a hopeful, solutions-oriented team to identify with. And then third, center the in-group. So tap into values of compassion and in-group care by talking about all children or all people, such as immigrants, in a way that leads to social benefits. So including immigrants as part of the in-group. And the cautionary tale when messaging culture wars is not to downplay concerns while also not playing into fear-mongering. So I'll read another message, same goals, and this is looking at gender equity. A congregant at our church asked me if it was hard having a transgender daughter. I said that being a parent is always hard, but I try to focus on how I can provide the best support possible for my kids. What does it look like to raise kids who know themselves, who feel comfortable, who have a sense of self-trust and trust in the people who love and care about them? I have the same goals for my trans daughter as I do my other kids. I'm just a mom doing my best, trying to raise a kid who is going to be a productive member of society, build community, and hopefully find something they love in their life. So this message was effective at tapping into the values of in-group care. So talking about the church community, being a parent. It taps into the value of compassion, acknowledging parenting is hard, and then looking at equality. So having the same goals for her trans daughter as her other children. This ad, Common Sense, works because the message is relatable, as is the messenger, and it taps into in-group care, compassion, and nostalgia. And it was effective at moving rural white women 29 points towards agreeing that politicians should not interfere with the teacher's ability to educate kids on gender and sexuality in an age-appropriate way.
It seems like common sense is hard to come by these days. It breaks my heart watching politicians meddle in our schools. My kids are grown, but I've known their teachers most of my life. I trusted them to support my kids, to let them be who they wanted to be. Parents and teachers have got this. I trust us, not politicians, to know what's best for our kids.
We also wanted to show you an example of a meme that we created to move our audience on critical race theory. And this was effective because it uses both humor and it taps into the in-group care value. So we have developed over 40 research-informed ads and more than 475 values-based messages that are effective at moving moderate women on key issues. And we are developing even more messages, ads, and research right now that will be released throughout the year. And we really believe in radical collaboration to build power in the field and to broaden our collective impact. So we do this by providing turnkey creative research and messaging services to our partners in kind, white label or with the Galvanize logo. So if this is something you're interested in, please reach out. We would love to talk to you. And that is it. Thank you so much for your time. Very happy to take questions. And again, my colleague, Kristin Wheeler, our Chief Strategy Officer, will be joining for the Q&A. She is such a wealth of knowledge and also has been very, very close to the research. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ariel. So yeah, you can stop your screen share. And Kristin will be joining in. So let me start with a couple just quickies that I had noticed in the chat, more by way of clarification. One was who in the first ad you showed, the woman with the kid running around in the background, was that a candidate? Who was that someone running for office?
No, she's just a mom. She runs an after-school program in Pennsylvania. And so she's a teacher, a mom, runs her own business. And she did this ad for us. We only use real messengers. So they're taken from their stories. Sometimes they'll approach us, sometimes we'll approach them. But one of the reasons we wanted to show this ad is, hilariously, we end up spending a whole day shooting all this beautiful B-roll, come out with this very emotional ad. And then at the end of the day, we're like, could you just do it on a selfie too? And what we're testing and learning is that the authenticity of somebody just flipping their camera around, seeing sort of the chaos of our normal life in the background is sometimes even more effective than all the beautiful music and all the emotional B-roll. And this is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, I really liked that, how homespun it was. But so like what context would you be using something like that in? Where would that ad be deployed? Toward what purpose?
Sure. So our vertical short ones are deployed on probably all the places you're thinking of. So all over Meta. So that includes Facebook Reels, Instagram Reels. This ad in particular is C3, which means it's nonpartisan. And so we actually were allowed to show it on TikTok, which is hard to get through these days. They've got very stringent rules and policies of what can pass and what's political and not political. The other places an ad like this or the other ones you saw might be shown by our audience is on places that we would consider connected TV or streaming. So we don't play anything over traditional television, but now that 85% of the TVs in American households are connected to Wi-Fi, that allows us to actually play these ads when you are maybe going to watch something on Hulu and you don't have the paid account and you have to watch a whole ad. Or if you're logging on to womensmagazine.com and you want to get access to a free article, you would watch one of our ads first. So over our full paid digital ad program, 75% of what we're actually putting out into the world is ads that somebody can't skip through and are ads that are called addressable, which means we can guarantee that Jane Smith living in Kenosha, Wisconsin, who we want to get the ad, is the one getting it.
Okay. And then what are you hoping, like when you have women see these ads, what are you hoping they will do? Where are you trying to move them on an issue in an upcoming election? Is it just general background education? What is it?
Yeah, so When it comes to the C3 ads, so what we're doing through our Galvanize Together programming, that's really to just try to get them thinking about these issues, building a community for them where they feel safe talking about this. I think Dear Grace, our advice column, is really interesting because there's definitely kind of a voyeuristic component to it where they can kind of be part of the conversation by watching without actively participating in it. So it's a really good way to engage the audience, get them to think about these issues in different ways. And then again, we're using our messaging to inform all of our responses that we're sending to them. So we know what is going to resonate with them based on their values and help to kind of move and open their mindset. And then we take it a little bit further with our C4 work, which is actually moving to actually persuade them on those key issues to start informing their voting behavior. So that is kind of the trajectory. Kristin, would you add anything there?
No, that was perfect. I'll just add that the one way we measure it in the real world is through in-field randomized controlled trials. And we do a variety of both panel surveys where certain folks are pulled into a panel. They're asked a question before they've ever seen any of our ads over a series of months. And then at the very end of our treatment, we call it basically the end of the campaign cycle. We do a follow-up survey to see, like, did we move them or not? And to give you an idea of the effects that we've had so far, in our 2022 midterm in-field RCT, we ran a digital ad program to a couple million moderate white women living in rural, small town, ex-urban areas across 3 Midwest states. And at the end of those 7 months, what we saw was a 14.1 net movement towards the Democratic Senate candidates in Ohio, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, which is unprecedented shift. Typically, you see maybe a percentage point net movement. So if you think about that binary, Dem versus Republican, it was 8.6% towards the Democrat, and then we pushed the Republican down to get that 14.1. And then underneath that, we saw the next biggest shift on reducing blame on the Democratic Party and Biden for inflation, and then also increasing their support that only women and their loved ones and their family members should make any decision regarding pregnancy.
That is an amazing movement. And it sounds like really a testament to how important it is to layer all these communications, not just like come in at the 11th hour with some great commercial and expect some big movement, but you're really like cultivating relationships and trust and having an ongoing conversation even through the off cycles. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what you all are doing as well on the ground. Is what we see is that we're living in such highly polarized times, as Ariel opened us up to think about at the beginning of this. Because of that, it's hard to go straight into politics these days. Folks don't want the bickering. Folks feel like everyone's just yelling on both sides, and they don't feel like they have a team identity. And so what Galvanize is working to do is let's build an identity that is a space for folks to have cognitive dissonance, to talk about current events in a way that is not all bickering and screaming, that is more solutions oriented, and that makes folks feel really seen and heard in the process. And I think you're exactly right, Erica. Those values driven, more issue education ads and messages are doing exactly that. And we don't need to get as political because we're really meeting folks exactly where they're at.
Yeah. Okay, folks, I'm going to start looking at the chat, and feel free to raise your hand too and ask a question. Something I did see early on was someone noted that immigration was the #2 issue. And so she was wondering what learnings do you have around immigration?
Yes, happy to talk more about that. I put this in the chat. I'll repeat it for everybody. So that spike we saw in immigration, when we look at who's in that 11%, so far, the vast majority of those folks are folks we would say are entrenched on the right. They're the MAGA extremists who are never going to be movable. So we're like, okay, one moment of sigh of relief. We're not surprised by that, but it doesn't mean we can ignore immigration, as I'm sure you're all seeing in your own backyards. We know we can almost set our clocks to it when the right is going to come in with all of their grievance and racial-based messages starting late this summer. So we're doing the work now to better understand what is our audience seeing narrative-wise, and then more importantly, what are they believing? And then what is that perceived set of anxiety that they have? We'll be able to come back to you all in the next couple of weeks. We just fielded some recent surveys on Monday around immigration that dig a little bit deeper under the hood about where our audience currently is. And then we'll be developing the messages that will move and hold them toward progress.
Okay. Let's see. I don't see any hands up. Jackie, am I missing anyone, or is there any other questions you noticed in the chat?
Yes, we had somebody asking about targeting young women, and especially like what platforms you are using and presenting on.
Want to start, Ariel?
Yeah. So when I talked about our three segments of women, actually our largest and our youngest voter segment, they are the uncertain individualists. They're in the middle. So it's interesting. We've done a lot of research on them. They're an interesting group of people. We call them kind of more of a work in progress. They're exploring their identities and their values and their beliefs. So for example, if we were to ask them about some issue, they will frequently respond with the neither agree or disagree option. So only 7% of that group say they're actually very confident in their political opinions. So in all of our work, we are specifically targeting that audience as well. So we know how to reach them and we know how to deliberately target them in all of our programming and our ads. And Kristin, I'm sure you can add more to that as well.
Just to say, your assumptions of where you think we're finding them online are probably pretty accurate. You know, they're not on Facebook, but they are on TikTok and Instagram. None of them have ever had ties to cable whatsoever. So finding them on streaming TV is actually the only way. I would say the new piece of information we got access to last year that was surprising to us is how much they are also streaming radio. And so we're learning more about that and podcast opportunities to reach them as well. So it's an exciting new venture as the media landscape is shifting. And then the other piece that Galvanize Together is doing is kind of creating its own set of media for them to come in and get that surround sound good news boost and being spoken to in the way that they need to be.
Bruce, why don't you go ahead?
Yes, fantastic work, fantastic, useful information. My question, here in our area, we're working with a number of, for first time, very young, mostly women candidates, rural areas, low density population, the kind of people who could really, really benefit from this information. I mean, tremendously. So how do we sort of link them up? Do they go online and look at Galvanize USA? What's the best way to do that?
That is a great question. Thank you for raising that. So because of compliance issues, we're not able to directly work with candidates. However, we do have, and Kristin just put this in the chat, this is our playbook. And so this is the go-to resource that is available to candidates and anybody who might be on the PAC or hard side of things, that they can go and they can access our messages, they can see our research, and they would be able to use that information as they're talking to their constituencies. So please feel free to peruse that and pass along to anyone who you think might benefit from this.
Wonderful, thanks. Mike, go ahead. Oh, okay. I'm not sure what happened to Mike. So let's go to Susan.
Okay, I put in the chat, but I am in a pretty rural area and I really find a lot of issues with misinformation and a lot has been written about, the Democrats seeming very, more educated, which if you look at it, it is kind of true. So how do you get them to find the facts without and do it in a way where you're not seeming like I know more than you? It's a really tough one because their husbands are these MAGA extremists and they're probably listening half the time they're listening to their husbands and their husbands like telling them who to vote for and what to do and everything else. How do you fight that?
Yeah, I'm happy to approach that. I live in a rural town on the Canadian border with 115 people. And even the misinformation of like what a neighbor's up to can change as soon as it goes 1 mile away from our house. So I'm very familiar with this. And what we call this to be permission structure with our audience who may be married to male spouses in their house is they need permission to think differently and on their own, and they need permission to think certain ways. And so one of the ways that we're combating that long term through this transformational behavior change work is through Galvanize Together, that nonpartisan space where we're allowing women to be with other women, to form their own identity, to build a team, which allows them a new permission structure, essentially. And then when it comes down on cutting down mis and disinformation, I saw some folks in the chat. Part of it is tools like, do folks have the education and access to see something, understand if they should believe it or not? The part of it is that like media literacy, which we're constantly doing with our audience. And then the other piece that I think is even more valuable that we've been learning in our recipe for success is when folks finally make a behavior change, whether it be who you're voting for or whether it be if you're getting active in your community, you're not making that behavior change based on your brain. You're making it on what's called your insula, which is a very technical term for your gut. So if you ever want to party trick, tell people you're making a decision with your insula instead of your gut, that's the technical term for it. It's very real. We're all moved by emotion and our heart and our gut at the end of the day. And so we have to be, as a progressive movement, better at appealing to that emotionality, appealing to the better side of all of us, and giving them anecdotes and stories that they'll repeat back to folks that bring them to the right side of history, versus facts that can really get lost in the sauce, you can easily mix up, and they don't resonate with folks and are not held on to. So there's no silver bullet solution. It is slow and steady work that's likely going to live past myself and many others. But if we don't start, we're going to be in this exact same position year over year over year.
Wanted to add just one thing to that. I really just to emphasize that like this is 2024. We know this is an election year, but this work really is a marathon, not a sprint. So it's going to continue long after this election. So unfortunately, I guess we won't be out of jobs for a while. But also what kind of stood out to me in that question is talking about the role of, you know, these women's husbands or the men in their lives. And I think one kind of very specific example of how that might show up in some of our ads is having actually the husband or someone in the back of the ad can actually help and resonate with our audience a little bit more. It kind of just shows that authority, like it's okay to have these views, and that can actually be very effective as well.
Great. Barbara, go ahead.
Yes, I'm the person that put about media literacy in the chat. And I actually have developed, I've created a news literacy workshop to give people tools to decode the news. The only problem is that you would have to have a computer. This is part of, there's no other way, but if you or someone else has a computer, there are websites that you can go to check your facts on those websites. And there are also what's called SIF, to stop, investigate, find better different sources, and then trace back to the original. So this is possible. And adults are very shortchanged. Everything is going toward the K through 12 and college. So this could be something that people might find useful. Anyway, okay, thank you.
Feel free to post a link if you'd like, Barbara, in the chat so we can look at that later.
I don't have a link to the PowerPoint.
Okay.
But if you're interested, I could send it. I
Sure.
would send it to you.
Yeah, please
So
do.
I would need, I'll put my email in the chat. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks. Beth.
Hey, Anthony says I should raise my hand rather than throw my stuff in the chat, so here I am. Let's see, two questions. One, somebody raised a question before about dealing with misinformation. I think one of the things I'm finding in the field is just this incredible, overwhelming apathy or a sense of removal that people have, that, you know, politics even matters kind of. I mean, people have lots of complaints about what's wrong with their lives, but I think they no longer are seeing political engagement as part of their own solution for whatever reason. So my question is, how are you, is there an aspect of your program that is focused on somehow mobilizing people to care? You know, how do you deal with that? And then a second question I have, which is related, is are there ways that people on this call or other people we know can actively get involved in supporting your work? And I say that because, you know, we all need to be pulling out all the stops, is my own view on things. And I know a lot of people who are looking for ways to get involved, but they really need structures to work in. Thank you.
I'm going to start us off, and I'm sorry to take us all the way back to 2016, but go back to that space with me. One of the overarching narratives that came out of the 2016 election was, oh my God, I cannot believe that 53% of white women in this country voted against their self-interest. And myself, our founder and executive director, Jackie Payne, and many others looked around and said, like, well, wait, did they vote against their self-interest, or did we not actually know their interest? And I think that that is so true and rooted in what we're doing. And some of the missteps, many of the missteps the progressive movement has made over the century has been guessing and making assumptions about the interests of voters and not encompassing as many folks, especially when it comes to rural voters. A lot of assumptions that are being made about what is a rural voter, who is a rural voter, what do they care about. So Galvanize was really founded on, like, let's turn that over, like, let's dispel that myth and really talk to folks and engage with them and figure out, if this is your interest, it makes total sense why you would have supported Trump. We messed up. We missed the opportunity to connect your interest with a world in which everyone is better off. And that's exactly what Galvanize is pivoting to do right now with this massive critical voting block right now. And so everything we do, we say, is part of really lowering the temperature on mis and disinformation, smoothing out the bumps to make the choice to choose progress as easy as possible for our audience, which means meeting them at their true interests, speaking to them in a way that they can be seen and heard, which is emotionality driven by those emotions and those gut and the heart, and less about the brain and the facts. So I think that's part of it. And then I'll turn it over to Ariel to add anything and talk about how folks can get involved.
I think that was great. And then in terms of how to get involved, you know, for us, it is all about just, we want to share all of this with the world. And so again, we make all of it, you know, provided in kind. If you work for an organization that, you know, wants to use any of our messaging, very happy to have a conversation with you, or it's accessible also on our playbook. And then for all of our ads, for anybody on this call who might actually do some of the digital side of the work, we also are planning, we have a whole plan to deploy these in our 4 core states, again, Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And then my role is really to be kind of doing a landscape analysis about what are some of the other battleground areas this year. And that's really based on the needs on the ground and where our partners are. So if you think that, you know, some of these ads might be really pertinent to those you're working with in the field, would love to share all of this work. But I also think it comes down to almost just on a personal level. I'm based in Columbus, Ohio. So the women that we are working with, these are members of my family. They're, you know, my cousins and my aunts and my siblings. So even just down to that level of how can you use this work, it's having conversations with these women in your life.
Susan in the chat was asking, so is the strategy that women are coming together through Galvanize and that they will kind of become their own year-round affinity groups that'll talk about issues and become politically active? And is Dear Grace the mechanism through which that's happening, or something else?
Yeah, the Galvanize Together, which is a totally nonpartisan space for folks who love talking about tax entities, it's C3. And so the idea is that it's not going straight at politics. We often think about it as like, what are we serving to them on their plate every single day? Because we always want a mix of dessert and vegetable and a good protein. And so they get a little bit of everything. and you get it primarily through SMS and email. And so you're getting a weekly advice column, which you also get to respond back to. And like, did Grace get it right? What advice would you have given to somebody? You can operate in comments and really have that digital community. You also get asked hot topics. Our audience loves being asked their opinion about things because they often get, you know, brushed over on a lot of stuff in their life. So we ask them questions every week, we engage with them, and then they get to do fun quizzes and interesting things. And then the other cool thing is we do mutual aid where folks can opt in and fill out a survey to let us know what they think about different topics. So one example is about motherhood and how hard it is to be a mother in America in 2024. You get paid $100 to come and sit on Zoom with 7 other women just like you from across the country, and you get moderated by a social worker. So it's sort of like civic and political therapy you're getting paid to do. We record those conversations, which they fully opt into. We take clips of that and then send that back out to our 125,000 plus members. So you're getting that idea of like, oh, well, if that woman, Christy, feels that same way, like that's my thoughts too, or I never thought about that. And that program is all women, regardless of race or ethnicity. It's really geared towards moderate women, but anybody from any background can come and be in that space with us. And elections are a critical part of what's going to move the needle in this country. And so when elections come up like this year, Galvanize Action, which is our C4 political space, comes in and says, we actually have an opinion on who's going to be right and who's going to be wrong for progress this year. And we connect with women through their values, but we're persuading them with the outcome of being, we need you to support the candidates that move the needle toward progress. And we're doing that through issues and values, but we are very clear about the opinion that we're taking, and that's all done through Galvanize Action. And as our membership program grows and our broadcast ads program grow, the Venn diagram of folks who are getting both is also starting to grow. And that is the long-term plan, that we know some folks are going to move toward progress by just being in this C3 community, and some are going to need the dial turned up every election cycle and get some persuasion as well. So that's our concept and our theory of change. We measure everything through program evaluation, in-field RCTs, precinct and panel as well. We are total research and measurement nerds. If you ever want to learn more about that, most of it is on our website and our playbook.
And where are most of the women learning about like Dear Grace and some of these other communities? Is it an app? Do they see it on Instagram? How do they get connected?
Yeah, all the same places that we can serve ads to. So we are serving specific ads that are inviting them, that we've targeted and learned. They might be joiners. They might be right for this type of program. So it could be an Instagram reel. We've also got some stuff for anybody who's on Pinterest. Guilty as charged. You may get served an ad on Pinterest as you're organizing, you know, what the graduation party for your son might look like this spring. You could see an ad to come join women just like you.
Interesting. And then someone was wondering too, you said that you really, your testing of messages is really oriented toward white women, white moderate women. Have you ever done testing with moderate women of color? And are you tend to see any differences?
Yeah, we've done this in a few different ways. So one is we'll just take existing messages that we feel, okay, there's a very clear through line of values, whether it be compassion or nostalgia. For example, we've actually found that the majority of our third party, they're called, abortion messages, as Ariel showed, which basically says, I would never have an abortion, but I know that if a woman in my life needed access to that, I would support her in that choice. Those ones pop especially well with moderate Latina women. Again, a lot of the faith-based angle messages that we do as well pop with that audience. And then we have very surprising learnings where whenever we have the capacity and resources, we'll pause and test to the larger voter population. So in 2020, our founder has an unconnected PAC, the One for All committee that I supported, and we were building ads for Biden. And we developed a model to say, like, out of everyone in the country, who are these 4 ads most effective with? And we surprisingly found that one of the ads that worked most well with our suburban and small town moderate white women also worked really well with 35-year-old something Black men in urban areas. And it allowed us to get new learning, figure out like what is happening here, what can we learn? And then we also were able to give that ad in kind to partners who were struggling with that population in Detroit. And then they ran it. And so all the ways we can hit collective impact is exactly what we're hoping to do.
That's great. A few people have been asking whether this video and their PowerPoint will be available afterwards. Yes, it will. We will send it to all of you. Jackie, have you seen any questions that I haven't gotten to in the chat?
I believe you've gotten to everything, or people eventually raise their hands and ask them.
Okay, so last call, if anyone wants to raise your hand. We've got one more minute here for another question.
Sorry, can you hear me now? This is Mike.
Yes, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, just curious, calling from Georgia and very interested in this really wonderful research. Similar to an earlier question, wondering how we might be able to have involvement or benefit from your findings and your work in campaigns, particularly in North Georgia.
Yeah, thank you for that. So Georgia is one of those that we are keeping an eye on, one of those states. So would love to just be connected with you and learn a little bit more about what you're working on. And then I would say also one thing I didn't mention in terms of how we collaborate with people. As we're creating ads, it is always so wonderful if people have, trusted messengers that might want to also serve in those ads. I think that's always really great. So if anybody knows someone who might be a really great candidate to be in one of our ads, we would love to hear that as well. And then, yes, please feel free to follow up via email, and we will make sure you get connected to the right person on our team for a follow-up.
Great, thank you.
Great. Well, I'm going to bring us to a close. I want to thank Ariel and Kristin so much. There have just been all these comments in the chat saying how incredibly helpful and valuable this is, and down to earth and great information. So thanks so much. I will tell you all a little bit about what's up next month. And for our May briefing, this will be the fourth and final in our communication series. And it's going to be pretty different from the ones we've had in the past, have been more like more like one-way communication, kind of content creation for activists and groups and campaigns, like what kind of speech might a politician make, or what kind of meme would you post on social media. But next month is going to be Sharon Strand Ellison, who created something called Powerful Non-Defensive Communication. And this is going to be much more in the interpersonal realm. Like, how do you talk about your opinions across lines of difference? How do you have that hard conversation that you've been avoiding with your sister or your neighbor? And she is just like incredibly gifted at sharing techniques for learning about the other person's opinion and then sharing your own opinion without putting the person on the defensive, so that you can really have a meaningful exchange of views. I hope to see you all next month. And thanks again to Ariel and Kristin. Bye-bye now.
Thanks so much. I just was very, felt so much heart